What if the very person who's supposed to welcome you into the family was secretly plotting your downfall? What if, over what should have been a simple family dinner, you discovered a betrayal so dangerous it could have ended your life? This is the story of how one man uncovered his mother-in-law's shocking scheme, how a single decision turned the tables, and how the truth finally came out in the most unforgettable way. Stay with me until the end, because you won't believe what she had hidden behind her smile. My name is Ethan Cole, and I'm 34 years old. On the surface, I live what most people would call a lucky life. Married to a beautiful woman, stable career, a modest but comfortable home in Portland. But like many stories worth telling, the cracks start to show once you look closer. I grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad was a mechanic, my mom worked part-time at a diner, and we lived paycheck to paycheck. I worked hard, paid my way through college, and eventually built a small but thriving digital marketing firm. It wasn't flashy, but it provided a life of independence I was proud of. When I met Emily, my wife, it felt like everything finally aligned. She was smart, kind, funny, and supportive. But with Emily came her family, and more specifically, her mother, Margaret Whitfield. From the very beginning, Margaret treated me with suspicion. She came from money, old money, the kind that lived in country club halls and whispered about lineage like it still mattered in the 21st century. Her late husband, Thomas, had left her well off, and she never missed an opportunity to remind me that I didn't come from their world. At first, I brushed it off as protective mother-in-law behavior, but over time, her little digs became sharper. Emily could have married a doctor, you know, or it's nice that you're trying with your business, Ethan, but stability matters. Emily always defended me, but the tension lingered like smoke you couldn't fan away. Still, I wanted peace. Emily loved her family, and I wasn't about to drive a wedge between her and her mother. So I smiled through the backhanded compliments, endured the silent judgments, and told myself Margaret would come around. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was a Friday evening when the storm finally broke. Emily and I had been invited to her parents' house for dinner. Margaret insisted it would be a chance to bond. Something about her tone set me on edge, but I agreed. Emily seemed excited, and I wanted to believe her mother was finally making an effort. We arrived at the Whitfield estate just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold. Margaret greeted us at the door, her smile tight, her eyes glinting in a way I couldn't quite place. Her second husband, Robert, was already seated in the dining room, glass of wine in hand. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Margaret had gone all out, roast duck, garlic mashed potatoes, sautéed vegetables, and her famous apple tart waiting on the sideboard. Emily chatted happily with Robert, catching up on work and family gossip. For a moment, I almost let my guard down. But then I noticed it. Margaret was watching me too closely, not with the usual disdain, but with something darker. Every time I took a sip of my wine, her gaze flicked to my glass, and when she refilled it, I noticed her hand lingered just a second too long. I pushed my fork around my plate, mind racing. Years of instinct, both from business and life, told me something wasn't right. When dessert was served, Margaret set a glass of brandy in front of me, her smile too wide. "To new beginnings," she said softly. I raised the glass, but instead of drinking, I set it down. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a faint shimmer at the rim. A grainy residue clung to the surface, barely visible unless you looked for it. That's when I knew. I had a choice to make. I could call her out in front of everyone and risk Emily's heartbreak, or I could bide my time and gather proof. I chose something in between. As Margaret turned to refill Robert's glass, I quietly switched mine with his. The motion was subtle, masked by Emily laughing at one of Robert's jokes. No one noticed. Minutes later, Robert lifted the glass and took a sip. The change was immediate. His face tightened, his hand trembled slightly, and he coughed hard into his napkin. Margaret froze, her smile vanishing. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her voice strained. Robert shook his head. "That brandy, it tastes off." Emily frowned. "Off how?" He pushed the glass away. "Bitter, metallic, something's wrong." I locked eyes with Margaret across the table. For the first time, she looked afraid. After dinner, I excused myself to help Robert to the living room while Emily cleared the plates. Margaret followed, her composure slipping. "What did you do?" she hissed at me, her voice low but venomous. I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing." Her face drained of color. She realized I knew. Before she could respond, Robert spoke up from the couch. "Margaret, what the hell was in that glass?" She stammered, searching for an excuse, but none came. Emily entered just in time to hear the question. Her eyes darted from her stepfather to her mother, then to me. "What's going on?" I sighed, my chest tight. "Emily, I didn't drink that brandy. Robert did, because your mother poured something into my glass." The room fell silent. Emily's face crumbled as she turned to her mother. "Mom, is this true?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. The aftermath was chaos. Robert demanded answers, Emily sobbed, and Margaret tried desperately to spin the story. She claimed it was a harmless sedative, that she only wanted to teach me a lesson for not being good enough for her daughter. But the residue in the glass told a different story. Robert, disgusted and furious, packed a bag that night and left. Emily, devastated, refused to speak to her mother for months. And me, I documented everything. The glass, the residue, Robert's reaction, it all went into a file with my lawyer's name on it. Margaret eventually admitted the truth. She had hoped to make me sick enough to embarrass me, to drive a wedge between Emily and me, and ultimately to push me out of her daughter's life. She hadn't counted on me noticing. She hadn't counted on me being smarter than her malice. Today, years later, Emily and I are still together, stronger than ever. Margaret lives alone in the echoing halls of the Whitfield estate, her reputation fractured. Robert divorced her within the year, citing her unforgivable actions. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed that shimmer on the rim of the glass. But then I remember, intuition and vigilance have saved me more than once in life. That night, they saved me again. So what do you think? Was Margaret truly dangerous, or just blinded by her obsession with control? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story of betrayal, family drama, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to Taylee's Between Time for more unforgettable stories that will keep you hooked until the very last word.